A day of terror and dishonor. Myanmar's latest crackdown on anti-coup protesters draws international condemnation. At least 100 people, including children, have been shot dead in the deadliest day of protests since the coup. Labourers and tugboats work through the night to dislodge a giant container ship from the Suez Canal. The maritime traffic jam is costing an estimated $400 million per hour. And several people, including one foreign worker, have been killed after militants linked to the IS group raid a town in northern Mozambique. Those are your top stories this hour. I'm Julia Kim. Now, the latest crackdown in Myanmar has drawn international condemnation, with the EU describing it as a day of terror and dishonor. At least 100 people, including children, were gunned down in the deadliest day of anti-coup protests yet. As the total number killed since February's coup rises to over 400, the junta celebrated the country's annual Armed Forces Day. France 24's Yenna Lee has more.
Defying the military once again, anti-coup protesters marched in their hundreds in Dawei, carrying National League for Democracy flags and flashing the three-fingered salute. On their posters, the acronym CDM, that stands for Civil Disobedience Movement. Meanwhile, soldiers were on the lookout for demonstrators. On foot and by car, the crackdown sowing fear. In this amateur footage, we see a man in uniform shooting at men on a motorbike. Two people trying to flee, but one is dragged away. Observers estimate that security forces killed dozens of people in some 40 towns and cities on Saturday, including children. On the same day, the military celebrated its annual Armed Forces Day with a march and a flypast. Coup leader Min Aung Hlaing welcomed by a brass band. The general promised to hold elections, but refused to give a time frame. In his speech, he thanked Russia for its support.
I would like to acknowledge the presence and substantial support of the Russian government and their armed forces to the Myanmar armed forces in a friendly manner.
Representatives from Beijing, too, were present at the parade, but foreign dignitaries were few and far between as international pressure on the junta mounts. The UK said the latest killings marked a new low. The US ambassador to Myanmar accused the army of murdering unarmed civilians.
Myanmar's people have spoken clearly. They do not want to live under military rule. We call for an immediate end to the violence and the restoration of the democratically elected government.
Earlier this week, Washington and London announced new sanctions on junta-controlled businesses.
Well, staying in Myanmar, one of its largest armed groups, the Karen National Union, has accused the junta of launching airstrikes against them. The KNU says fighter jets bombed an area under their control near the Thai border. It comes after the rebels seized a military base in southeastern Karen state. The reported air assault is the most significant attack for years in the region. Around a third of Myanmar's border territories is controlled by a myriad of rebel groups, some of whom have their own militias. Now, there's been some headway in efforts to dislodge a giant container ship from the Suez Canal. Experts have managed to move its stern and get its rudder and propeller working. It's hoped that heavier tugboats and high tides will help dislodge the vessel by the start of next week. The skyscraper-sized ship has been stuck for 5 days, a delay that's costing an estimated $400 million per hour. France 24's Maria Sofos has this report.
A small glimmer of hope for global shipping as renewed efforts to refloat the huge vessel stuck in the Suez Canal could see it freed within days. This, according to the Dutch firm working to dislodge the container ship using a combination of heavy tugboats, dredging and high tides. On Saturday, the chairman of Egypt's Suez Canal Authority said that the stern and the rudder of the ship had started moving on Friday night, but added that he could not lay out a set timetable for freeing the ship. He did, however, shed some light on the cause of the grounding.
It might have been a technical human error, which will be revealed through the investigation. Many errors might be the cause, but we cannot prove anything yet. The only clear cause is that there were strong winds and a sandstorm, but this is not the only one, as others will be revealed during this investigation.
The maritime traffic jam caused by the stranded ship has grown to more than 300 vessels. About 15% of world shipping traffic passes through the canal, and currently the grounding is holding up some $9.6 billion worth of cargo each day between Asia and Europe. If the fresh attempts to refloat the ship are unsuccessful, hundreds of containers will have to be removed from the front of the vessel to lighten it, making it easier to pull free.
Well, turning now to Mozambique, and several people, including one foreign worker, have been killed after militants raided the town of Palma in the northern Cabo Delgado province. Jihadists linked to the Islamic State group have seized control of the town, which is near a liquefied natural gas site involving energy companies, including France's Total. Now, Total has now announced it's halting operations at the site. Well, for more on this ongoing attack, here's Dewa Mavinga, Southern Africa Director of Human Rights Watch.
This is a very unexpected event today here in Belgrade, Serbia. We are at the main vaccination center of the capital of Serbia, Belgrade. Here, since January, a huge number of the population, of the Belgrade population, has received its vaccine against COVID-19. In the country, more than 20% of the population has been vaccinated already. But what is happening today is really something unconventional, namely Serbia has decided to give the opportunity to receive vaccine to everyone who would come here. So as a result of that, many people from neighboring countries, namely from Bosnia, from North Macedonia, but also from other neighboring countries, decided to come and spend the weekend here in Belgrade, as well as in two other major cities of the country, to receive the COVID-19 vaccines, because in their countries, the vaccine is absolutely not available. Also, it's interesting to note that the Serbian Chamber of Commerce...
Well, just apologies to our viewers for that technical issue there. We will be bringing back Dewa Mavinga later on in the programme. Now, let's get a quick update on COVID figures here in France. The country has recorded 42,619 daily new cases, an increase of 750 from the day before. Daily infections have nearly doubled since the start of this month. Now, the number of COVID patients in intensive care is also up to 4,791. France now approaching a mid-November high recorded during its second wave. Well, the government has described the situation as critical. It's stepping up police checks in train stations and motorways in Paris and several other regions to enforce travel restrictions. The WHO has urged countries to donate 10 million doses of COVID vaccines to the COVAX program. The international scheme collects vaccines paid for by rich countries and redistributes them to poorer nations. But one of their key suppliers, India, has stopped its deliveries. It's vaccinating its own population first amid a spike in domestic cases. Yana Lee tells us more.
The WHO's stated target was to ensure that every country could kick off their vaccination campaigns in the first 100 days of 2021. With just 2 weeks left, the international body says it's 10 million doses short of meeting its goal.
COVAX is ready to deliver, but we can't deliver vaccines we don't have. As you know, bilateral deals, export bans, vaccine nationalism and vaccine diplomacy have caused distortions in the market, with gross inequities in supply and demand.
So far, the International Vaccine Alliance, backed by the WHO, has shipped more than 32 million jabs to 61 countries. 16 states are scheduled to receive their first batches within the 2-week deadline, leaving 20 countries empty-handed for now. COVAX organisers announced delays after India decided to prioritise vaccines for its own population. The country's Serum Institute is a major producer of jabs and a major supplier for COVAX.
Well, of course, we are disappointed. That's why we're in continuous discussions with the government of India and the Serum Institute of India, with the hope that we can get some of those doses freed up and be able to then move back into a full swing scale up later in perhaps May.
The WHO also pointed to delays by AstraZeneca as a reason why it's struggling to stay on target. More than 180 countries are involved in the COVAX scheme. Their priority, vaccinate health workers around the world.
Well, to Turkey now, and hundreds of demonstrators have gathered in Istanbul this Saturday for anti-government protests amid a heavy police presence. Large crowds calling on the government to reverse its decision to withdraw from an international treaty which prevents violence against women. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan issued a surprise decree a week ago ending Turkey's participation in the landmark pact. Sharon Gaffney has more.
Hundreds of anti-government protesters, mostly women, gathered in Istanbul amid a heavy police presence. They're angry at the surprise decree issued a week ago, withdrawing Turkey from the Istanbul Convention, the landmark international treaty aimed at protecting women from violence and domestic abuse.
Pes etmeyeceğiz. Özgürlüğümüzü alana kadar, İstanbul Sözleşmesi'ni geri çekilene kadar.
Protesters are also demanding greater rights for the LGBT community after the government said it was annulling the legally binding treaty because it normalised homosexuality, encouraged divorce and undermined traditional family values.
Ne yazık ki bugün Türkiye'de eğer LGBT bireyseniz, eğer kadınsanız hukukun sizin yanınızda olması çok zor. Bu yüzden endişeliyiz, bu yüzden korkuyoruz.
The World Health Organization estimates that more than a third of all women in Turkey are subject to violence from a partner at some point in their lives, compared to 1 in 4 in Europe. Campaigners say Erdogan's withdrawal from a treaty once championed by Ankara and drafted in Istanbul jeopardises women's safety.
İstanbul Sözleşmesi'nden çekilmek ülkede yaşayan milyonlarca kadın ve kız çocuğu için bir felaket anlamına geliyor.
Activists are adamant that the protests will continue and that their years-long campaign to improve protections for women won't be wiped out by a single government-issued decree.
Well, here in Paris, a plaque in the Champs-Élysées gardens has been dedicated to the memory of the legendary Afghan commander Ahmad Massoud. The ceremony was held by Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo in the presence of former Afghan President Hamid Karzai and Ahmad Massoud's son. France 24's Monty Francis has the story.
He is a distant but familiar figure, Commander Ahmad Massoud, Afghan hero of the resistance to the Soviet invasion in the 1980s and in the fight against the Taliban. 20 years after his visit to Paris and his assassination a few months later, the French capital is dedicating a plaque in the Champs-Élysées gardens to him in the heart of the city.
On voulait un endroit prestigieux qui soit près des lieux de pouvoir de la République française. Bon, le 8e est aux confins. D'abord, se trouve dans le 8e arrondissement le palais de l'Élysée. Se trouve pas très loin dans le 7e, mais en face l'Assemblée nationale. On est au cœur du pouvoir en France. Et je pense que c'était un beau symbole à rendre à Massoud.
Just a day after the city unveiled its plans, Massoud's son spoke to France 24 at his home in Kabul. He was only 12 years old when his father was assassinated.
He was a Francophile, I'm a Francophile. We are in love with the France and the values that the French people they are holding so dear, the liberty, the freedom. And it shows that this amazing relationship between Afghanistan and France, it is only getting stronger. And we are going to continue this, and we are very grateful.
Massoud's father had an affinity for France, having studied at Afghanistan's only French high school, and he spoke French fluently.
Maintenant, pour la guerre, ils sont complets, comme on dit en français, complets. Ils sont prêts? Ils sont prêts pour commencer la guerre, pour continuer la guerre.
Massoud was posthumously named a national hero in Afghanistan after the Taliban was ousted from power. The date of his death, September 9th, is observed as a national holiday.
And finally, cities around the world are turning off their lights for Earth Hour this Saturday. Here in Paris, the normally luminous Eiffel Tower was plunged into darkness at 8:30 p.m. local time for 60 minutes. And there were similar scenes in Hong Kong, as you can see there. Nearly 4,000 companies and organisations and buildings switching off their lights to mark the event. While in Sydney, where Earth Hour first started back in 2007, the iconic Opera House and Sydney Harbour Bridge both went to black. Now, this year's event are highlighting the link between the destruction of nature and increasing outbreaks of diseases like COVID-19. Well, that's it from us. More news up next. Stay tuned to France 24.